Do you have questions about organizing your photos? Hi, it's Jennifer Wilson, your guide at Simple Scrapper. In this video, I'm answering all of your biggest questions about Adobe Lightroom. This is my favorite software, and I'm so excited to share more about why I love it and how it can work best for you. Let's get into it. All right, this is going to be fun. I've got 21 questions here submitted by the Simple Scrapper community, and I'm so excited to dig in and provide so much clarity on some of these issues. Now, if you've not yet watched the first two parts of the series, I will link them in the description box down below. They are a great setup for these questions today, in particular the second video where I walk you through my entire Lightroom workflow that actually answered a lot of the questions that I received. And so what I'm doing today is answering all the questions that remain. Shannon writes, what platform does Lightroom work best on? Laptop, iPad, is there a smartphone option? What's the learning curve? I paid for Photoshop and haven't used it. Well, that's the good news for today, is that Lightroom works everywhere, whether that's your laptop or desktop computer, your iPad or another tablet, or even on your smartphone, as we demonstrated in yesterday's video. Lightroom works everywhere, and each app is optimized for that particular device. Now, the learning curve, I find it a little bit easier than Photoshop, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in a bit. I find it more intuitive in terms of navigating between photos and using the sliders to make edits. Photoshop is layers based, and I find that a little bit trickier to pick up. The best part about Lightroom and really all Adobe software is the free tutorials that Adobe gives you. Directly on their website, that's always the best place to start to learn how to use something. Can Lightroom help with eliminating duplicates? Also, just basically if your photos aren't at all organized, how can it help organize them? So Lightroom doesn't have an automatic duplicate detection tool, but what it does have is really powerful visualization tools to allow you to compare two different photos next to each other or to see batches of photos on one screen. One of the things that always frustrated me with using folders or even using Photoshop to edit my photos or to manage my photos is opening and closing one at a time. Lightroom allows you to visualize larger amounts of photos, and you can even change how many you can view at a time so that it's much easier to compare different versions. Karen asks, can you easily access the photo you want to use from Lightroom, or do you have to go look for the original on your computer? Now, Karen, you've really hit on the true beauty of this software. It makes it super easy to locate the image that you want to find. So there's a couple different options if you say want to scrapbook a photo from your catalog. One is you can export a new copy of that image to any place on your computer. I often will put it on my desktop. And there's another question later on that relates to this. Or you can actually right-click inside of Lightroom to open up the original file location. Let's say you haven't made any edits to it, but you want to use that photo for scrapbooking and you want to print it. You can very, very quickly find that original location with no hunting or searching. Laura and Dottie both had similar questions. Laura asks, I don't have Lightroom, but I do have Photoshop. Is there a way to do the same in there? And then Dottie expands on that. I don't have a lot of experience with Photoshop and still have problems doing what I think are simple things to do. Is Lightroom easier to use than Photoshop? So we touched on that briefly, that I do think Lightroom is easier to use because you can see all of your photos together and it's very simple to toggle back and forth. I find Lightroom a little bit more guided than Photoshop. Now, the thing to understand is that they are actually very, very different. Lightroom fundamentally is a photo catalog. It is referencing the location of your images on your computer in one place so you know where everything is. It allows you to make edits and save those edits back to new files. Photoshop, in contrast, is a tool that allows you to manipulate an image, and then you could save it, but it's not doing anything to organize or catalog your images. So they're very, very different. And while both do editing, Photoshop actually has even more robust editing, which is why most people find it even more complicated. You can do layers inside of Photoshop, and you cannot do layers inside of Lightroom, which is why you can't be a digital scrapbooker with just Lightroom. You would need Photoshop for that. So they are quite different, and that's why Adobe does bundle them together in the photographer's plan, because they are very, very strong companions with their different feature sets. Kelly writes, I find the whole issue of creating and using a catalog very confusing. Maybe you can help sort out how to think about this. I have been folders-based for many years. I just can't quite wrap my mind around the catalog issue. Do you keep all of your photos in one giant catalog? Or do you create separate catalogs by year or some other organizational method? All right, so the fact that you're folders based is a really, really important start, because that's how I organize my originals as well. I keep them all neat and tidy in folders, and then I use Lightroom as a layer on top of that to peek inside of those folders very, very quickly. So think of it as a directory or an index to all of those images, an index that has a lot of functionality and features and allows you to not just organize and move around those images, but to edit them as well. So your catalog is a single file with links to all of those original images. Now, do I keep all of my photos in one catalog? I do, with one exception. My husband had a whole life before me, and so all of his photos are currently in a separate catalog so he can work on it on his computer. At some point, I would like to merge these into a single catalog, but at this point, it doesn't make sense to do so. I definitely wouldn't recommend creating separate catalogs by year, because you do have to open and close catalogs in order to access those images. And for the same reason, we don't want to open and close files inside of Photoshop or folders to be able to see our photos. We want to keep them as close together as possible in one catalog. Now, I've been answering these questions from the context of my system, which is using Lightroom Classic CC on my computer and Lightroom CC on my phone. And if you're not sure about that, go back to the last video to see my entire process. Laura's question here relates to the standalone version of Lightroom. She writes, I need to understand how to upgrade my version 4 of Lightroom to version 6. When I had to reinstall Lightroom 4 on a new computer, I lost the connections that happened previously. I also no longer had all those previous tags available. I feel like there must be a step I'm missing in connecting files or collections or catalogs. All right, so the simple answer here is it sounds like you probably didn't open up your same catalog. When you take an existing catalog and open it in a new version of Lightroom, it will use a wizard to automatically convert it to that new version. Sometimes it will create a duplicate copy of it, of just the catalog file, not your photos. But that catalog is where all of that information, your tags, and those links are stored. So that's probably the situation here, is that when you reinstalled Lightroom, you weren't opening that same catalog. Now, in terms of the connections between files, sometimes when you move files on your computer or rename a directory, those linkages will be lost. However, it's really easy to reconnect a batch of images. Lightroom provides prompts to locate the missing folders. And once you locate one missing folder or one missing file, it will automatically reconnect those other folders. All right, Denise writes, hi, I have over 10,000 photos in my library and it's getting a little slow. My photos are stored on an external hard drive. Should I start a whole new library? If I did that, would it speed up Lightroom, and would I still be able to go back to my old library easily to access older photos? So I did previously explained some of the pros and cons of having separate catalogs. Since that's what we're referring to when she says library, she means Lightroom catalog. Now, I have 38,000 photos in my catalog, and my photos are also on an external hard drive. I also don't have a super fast computer. I have a MacBook Air that's now about 4 years old. So one thing you want to think about is how your computer is being used. Do you have extra space on your hard drive? Do you have enough RAM? Are you trying to use too many applications at once? Now, that's possibly what's causing your slowdown, because 10,000 photos on a typical computer should be okay. Now, if your situation is such that this is the only change that you could make, then it's possible that you could want to create a new catalog. But as I described before, you want to keep your photos together, and opening and closing catalogs is a little bit slow and clunky. So if you can keep them together, that's what I would recommend. So my advice to you is to look at other issues with your computer to see what's causing the slowness, because it may not be Lightroom. That might just be a symptom of the existing slowness. All right, Anandi has a really great question here. She says, I'd like to know whether the CC version / mobile app is worth it. I'm still using standalone Lightroom version 6 and I'm happy with it, so I'm not sure I see a reason to upgrade. I'm especially interested in what features the mobile app has and how that might help consolidate phone photos with regular camera photos. So in yesterday's video, I talked all about how I use the mobile app to first curate my images directly on my phone and then automatically move them into my Lightroom Classic library. So as we mentioned then, you do need a Creative Cloud plan of some sort for that automatic transfer, because that's how it syncs your images. And Anandi is using a standalone version of Lightroom that doesn't have that capability. So from the perspective of editing and organization features, there really isn't that much of a difference. There, of course, are minor little tweaks here and there, but nothing that to me would make or break that decision, or that would determine whether or not you should upgrade. It's really your desire to have those images automatically come into your computer version of Lightroom directly from your phone and how much you want that. Or you may have another solution, such as using Dropbox, that gets those photos in there easy enough for you and you don't need to upgrade. So that's the considerations that I would have for you. There's certainly pros and cons to either. Obviously, with a Creative Cloud subscription, that's a little bit greater cost, but it might be worth it if that automation and efficiency is what you're really focused on. In terms of features alone for what the apps do, I wouldn't make that change because of that. To me, Sheena's question is really the big one of this presentation. She writes, I am leaning towards Lightroom Classic CC instead of the new Lightroom CC. The appeal of the new CC is that you can access your photos everywhere across all of your devices. I would love to know if you are using the Classic CC or if you're using the new CC. Do you store your photos yourself or do you use the Lightroom Cloud? Pros and cons of each. So as in yesterday's video, you know that I use Classic CC, but I didn't really go into why I made that decision and why I'm probably not going to be moving to Lightroom CC, the cloud-based software, anytime soon. So I totally agree that it is very appealing to have all of my photos across all of my devices accessible at any time. This is why I looked so deeply into making the switch myself. When it came down to it, though, I felt like I was too entrenched in my existing process. And it wasn't for lack of willingness to change. I was willing to make the switch if there wasn't such a huge cost burden on top of it. I currently subscribe to the entire Creative Cloud, but that only gives me 20 gigabytes of space. And in order to get, up to 1 terabyte of space, it was going to be quite cost prohibitive. And this would be on top of my existing Backblaze plan for backup, because Backblaze backs up my entire computer, not just my photos. If I was only using my backup for photos, then I feel like a Lightroom CC plan with additional storage would meet my needs. And I think it'll meet the needs of a lot of memory keepers. But for me, I also need to have all of my files, including all the videos that I create here, backed up on Backblaze. And so I wasn't really interested in adding more to my monthly costs to have space for something that I really already have working for me. So the main pro to me of Lightroom Classic is that fine-grained control of where your photos are stored and also controlling which ones get shared to the cloud. So it's very manual in that regard. But to me, that's also an asset because you can feel like you understand where things are going. Now with Lightroom CC or even other apps that work similarly, such as Photos and Google Photos, ones that are really supposed to be entirely cloud-based, those can be more confusing because they're managing your photos for you. So if you ever look under the hood, and in any of these, you'll find that it creates its own folder structure to sort your photos. And it may not make any sense to you at all, but they don't want you even looking under the hood. Usually these files are compressed into a single file and you have to actually open it up to see what that looks like. But to me, it makes it a little nervous because sometimes I do want to go back to that original file and I want to see the original metadata and I want that file. And it makes me less comfortable to have the software fully managing it. Those reservations aside, if I was starting out today and my photos weren't already organized, I would probably choose the Lightroom CC option. But because I am so entrenched and I have my backup system already working, I don't currently feel the need to switch, and I'm not really interested in paying the additional cost to have that cloud space. Now, of course, this could all change in the future, and I'm keeping an eye on how they make changes to the software and how the pricing of these plans changes over time, but that's where I'm at right now. So Karen asked another important question. Does Lightroom store the full high-res version or is there any compression? So in Lightroom Classic, it is referencing your original files. So you tell Lightroom where the file is and it's just adding it to the catalog to be there for you to find again. Now Lightroom CC, as we mentioned, works a little bit different. It's cloud-based and it's actually storing the full original version in the cloud. But at various points on your devices, whether that's your computer, your tablet, the web, your phone, it may be showing you a smart preview, which is a high-ish quality but still compressed version of your image. Now, at any time, you can call the full high-res version to your device, but by default, it wants to show these smaller images for speed and efficiency. Kelly writes, also, I'm not quite sure about the metadata issue. I use Adobe Bridge to organize my photos and add metadata because I understand that once it is added in Adobe Bridge, it's there permanently. Is the same true for Adobe Lightroom? If so, do you use this feature and how do you think it is best done efficiently? So you're correct that when you edit metadata in Adobe Bridge, it does automatically save it to your files. In Lightroom, it works a little bit different. You do have to press a button to save metadata back to your files, and you can do that in batches. So the functionality is there, but it is not as automatic as it is in Bridge. I don't personally use this feature all that much, and it's just more of a personal preference / laziness in terms of how I manage my photos. But I do have a tip about how to do it efficiently, and that's when you use the Adobe Lightroom CC app, as I showed in my video yesterday, that any metadata you add there, that actually gets saved to your files. Because I checked the example image and that metadata transferred over, and it's not just in Lightroom, it's actually in the file itself. So it sounds like Lightroom CC and Lightroom Classic work a little bit differently in terms of how they handle metadata, but using CC on your phone might be a great way to very quickly add that information to your photos so that it's saved to those files. So Lisa has a question about exporting for print to an external source. She says, I save them to a print folder on my desktop so I can easily open that one folder to upload to Persnickety prints. Can I then delete this folder? It seems silly to keep another folder of photos. So Lisa, this is exactly what I do in terms of printing my images, particularly if I'm printing them from Photoshop or uploading them to another service. I just create a quick folder on my desktop, and then I do delete it when I'm done with it. Now, if I have any nerves about did it work or not, I might save it there for a period of time, but I will often even label my folders with delete after a certain date so that I know I don't need to keep this folder because it's duplicate or just unneeded, and that helps me feel comfortable in going ahead and getting rid of it. So Evelyn's question is related, but a little bit different. She writes, should I be exporting my edited files, converting them to JPEGs, and saving them? So what she's saying is, when you edit an image in Lightroom, should you go ahead and export a new version of that image that includes those edits and bring that back into your library? Now, I think this is a matter of personal preference because I know a lot of people who do this and they want to save those JPEGs because they don't ever want to edit that picture again should, the worst happen and you lose your Lightroom catalog. So what's important to understand here is that when you make an edit in Lightroom, it's non-destructive. It's not touching that original file. It's saving a little recipe, if you will, to the catalog to say, make these changes to this file, and that's how you should display on the screen. But until you export that image, or sometimes we call that baking the edits, until you export that image, those changes are not saved to a file. And so Evelyn wants to know, should she bring that second version of the file back into Lightroom? And this is not something that I tend to do because I relatively trust that my Lightroom catalog is going to be there when I need it. And worst case, I feel like I could re-edit the image again. And what's most important to me is to have the original and to also keep my library relatively streamlined. So having duplicate copies is not always desired. Now, a side note to that is that one thing I like to do in Lightroom is to create a virtual copy of an image. And this, as it is described, is a virtual copy that allows me to edit images in different ways or even crop them in different ways so that if I ever want to export that variation, I can do that easily. But as I described in the answer to the last question, I tend to not save those exports. Once they're printed or used or uploaded, I will get rid of those files. Lisa has a good question with a quick answer. She says, I have all my photos on an external hard drive and it's backed up by Blackblaze. How can I get Lightroom to look at this external drive for older photos but keep newer photos on my laptop? So when you're inside of Lightroom, you can add images from different locations to your catalog. So when you click that import button, it will actually let you choose whether or not to move photos to a different location or just add them from their existing location. So if you like where your photos are located, and this is 2 different locations, you can add them to your catalog and it will just display as 2 different locations in that left sidebar in Lightroom. Lisa also has a really common question. She writes, I'm not clear how I can move photos from one folder to another within Lightroom. For instance, I have several photos in the 2004 folder that should be in the 2003 folder. I don't understand how to move within Lightroom. I understand if I move within hard folders, Lightroom will lose these images. Not really, but it doesn't know where they are in the catalog. Well, first off, Lisa, you're correct. If you move images outside of Lightroom, Lightroom will get really confused and it doesn't know where those images are located, and you'll have to reconnect those pictures to your catalog, as we described earlier in this presentation. Now, moving photos within Lightroom, fortunately, is super easy. It's just a matter of drag and drop. So if you have a group of images on the right side of your screen, you click on, or you can even control-click to select multiple images, and then you drag them directly to the folder where you would like them to be. Then Lightroom will ask you, do you actually want to move these files from one location to another? And in this case, it sounds like yes. So they're in the 2004 folder, and that's how they're indexed in Lightroom, but they should be in the 2003 folder. So when you drag them from 2004 to 2003 inside of Lightroom, It will pop up and ask you if you want to move those. You say yes, and it will actually physically move those files from folder to folder, which makes it really handy, and it will maintain the connections the entire time. Karen has another really common scenario, and that's related to deleting photos. So I want to set this up with another reminder that I'm using Lightroom CC on my phone and Lightroom Classic CC on my computer, because this is not going to work the same for a system where you're using Lightroom CC everywhere. So she writes, with photos you take on your camera roll going directly to Lightroom, how do you deal with the many duplicates of one pose? Sometimes I take 100 to get the right shot of my children. I then delete all but a couple on my phone. When you delete from your phone, do they also delete from Lightroom, or do you have to delete junk in both places? All right, so if I want to delete an image, if I delete it directly on my camera roll or on my phone, it's called the gallery. If I delete it there, it won't delete it from Lightroom if Lightroom has kind of already sucked it up. So you have to always think of this as Lightroom is auto-adding images from your device on your phone, and then from your computer, it's transferring the images from Lightroom CC to Lightroom Classic. So it's kind of two sucking up processes. It slurps it from one location to the other, and then it slurps it again to go from mobile to desktop. If you delete the photo before it has that chance to do the first slurp, then it is deleted permanently. If it's already slurped it up, which it does really, really quickly, then you really need to delete it from Lightroom. The exception there is if it's already been synced to your computer, deleting it inside of Lightroom on your phone isn't going to delete it from your computer. So here's what I like to do. If I haven't been on my computer in a while, so I know those photos haven't been synced, I will just go ahead and delete it from inside Lightroom CC on my phone. Now, if there's images that I know have already been synced to my computer, what I will do instead is just flag my photo for deletion. And this is typically what I do in general, just because doing the flag is just a swipe up or a swipe down of the finger when you're in that review mode inside of Lightroom CC. And I find that really handy. So then when I get on my computer, I can see all the photos that are flagged for deletion and delete them in one batch, which of course is also much faster than deleting them one by one on your phone, regardless of whether or not you're using Lightroom or not. So I hope that made sense to you. It's of course most important to just be careful and understand the behavior and test things out if you're not sure. So Evelyn's setup is similar to mine, and she's asking a question that's kind of the next step, the more advanced step of the previous question. She writes, I have the free 20 gig of cloud storage, but I have gotten notifications that I'm nearing my storage limit for my account and uploading new files may not be possible. She says my phone photos have a collection folder on Lightroom Mobile, which she calls LGE phone photos, that has almost 3,000 photos in it, and Lightroom Mobile shows that she has almost 6,000 in all photos. Do you think if I delete those photos in the LGE phone photos folder, it will free up space? All right, so first thing I want to remind everyone, when we're talking about working with both Lightroom Classic and CC, there's some terminology that they've shifted. So collections in Lightroom Classic, or your traditional standalone versions of Lightrooms, that's groupings of photos that are virtual. They're not actual folders, they're virtual groupings of images. In Lightroom CC, these are called albums. So if you're on your phone and you choose, you're looking inside of this album, which is a collection that you've synced back from your computer, and you choose remove from album on the image. Now there's not a delete option, it's called remove from album. It then pops up with a note to say, do you want to remove this from the album, which is kind of removing it from that organizational layer, or do you want to delete? If you choose delete, I tried this out and it actually just deletes it from your all synced photographs area. It's not actually deleting it. It doesn't link back to your computer and swipe that image that's already been copied over. So that's if you're deleting an image that's in a synced collection, which appears as an album in Lightroom CC on your phone. Now, if you wanted to delete an image from the all photos section, it's not in an album, it's in all photos. If it's already synced back to your computer, it also will not delete. And so that, again, you should use that flag to denote that you want to delete that image, because those flags do transfer back and forth. So that's my experience in testing this out for you. I highly recommend trying this yourself, because there may be small tweaks to your setup that make it slightly different than mine. So it's always best to test on just an image that you don't want to keep anyway, to see the behavior. And this is also true as we move forward, because my test is, today on September 11th, 2018, and Lightroom is always changing the software. They're changing the behavior a little bit to make it better for everyone, but sometimes that means things can work differently than they did in the past. So that's an important caveat for all these recommendations here, is to test things if you're ever unsure, because the situation may have changed. So Anne writes, how do you keep track of photos that you want to print? Do you create collections for certain projects? Do you flag them for enlargements? So I would say yes, I kind of do all of those things. Most of my collections are for specific projects that I want to keep forever. For example, my Before Your Story, I still have that collection inside of Lightroom, or for projects that I'm still working on or want to work on in the future. I have folders for printing at different sizes, because I'm often doing that in batches. So whether or not it's an enlargement or 4x6s or smaller prints, I will often keep them in folders labeled by size. So I don't do this in a way that I'm always trying to make sure I have all photos that I might want to print in there. I'm using it as kind of a temporary holding place for something that I'm working on and something that I intend to do soon, or I know I want to do in the future. I'm not trying to be exhaustive to make sure that every photo I might want to print is there, because there's too many images and I would find that overwhelming. All right, Anne also goes on to elaborate on her question. Do you have collections for library of memory scrapbooking? Do you use digital category drawers or storage binders? Do you rate tag everything? And do you have a collection for cold storage? So pretty much the answer here is no. And part of that is my own laziness. I have never run out of photos or stories to scrapbook. I'm always excited to just dig into my photo library and see what I can find. So I don't personally feel the need to be exhaustive in categorizing pre-scrapbooked photos in different ways. That said, I know there are a lot of people who really love the Library of Memory system. This is Stacy Julian's process as outlined in her book, Photo Freedom. And they love that we can really essentially take her physical, tangible system and apply it to organization in Lightroom. So if that excites you and that helps you find images and make your scrapbooking easier, then go for it. I would love to see how you do that, and I'd love for you to share it with our community, because I think that everyone's got to figure out what works best for them. And as I've always said, I'm a bit of a lazy scrapbooker. I love the process of creating, and while my brain does like to keep things organized, it's at the kind of minimal level that is functional and simple for me. I don't like to go a little bit deeper because I find that burdensome and it takes too much time. So Karen wants to know about the cost of Lightroom. So she writes, do you have a monthly subscription for Creative Cloud in full or just Lightroom? And what does it cost? So I have the entire Creative Cloud suite of all the applications, including Illustrator and InDesign and everything that I might possibly never use. But I do need enough of those to justify subscribing to the entire Creative Cloud suite. Now, there's a variety of Lightroom and photo management focused plans now. So you can get Lightroom CC with 1 terabyte of storage for $9.99 a month. You can also get Lightroom Classic plus Lightroom CC plus the 20 gigs of storage for $9.99 a month plus Photoshop. So that's the traditional photographer's plan. But now they have this new Lightroom Focus plan, the one that I mentioned, that is Lightroom CC cloud-based with that 1 terabyte of storage. So if you're just getting started and you are gung-ho on cloud-based, that might be the best choice for you. But then if you do want to use Photoshop and you're not sure which app you want to use yet, that other choice, the original photographer's plan, might be best. Now, of course, there is the option to upgrade your storage. And as I mentioned, I looked into upgrading my own storage on my plan, and it was going to be more than I was willing to pay. But you can get 1 terabyte of storage with Lightroom Classic, Lightroom CC, and Photoshop for $19.99 a month. So it really comes down to what's going to work best for you. And as always, you can download trials of the software so you can figure out, is Lightroom Classic or Lightroom CC going to work best for you? Play around with images you don't care about to really get to know the ins and outs. All right, so we have 2 final questions. I actually received many more that were similar to these. So Alicia writes, how do I start? I don't want to get bogged down or overwhelmed. Show me a simple way to keep track of my pictures. And then Stacy adds, I get overwhelmed with the thought of how many photos I have all over the place. When I do try to organize them, I get overwhelmed and I just walk away from the project. So these stories are super common. I know that you're overwhelmed and stressed out, and it's just a lot of files to manage. So actually what I recommend best is not starting with Lightroom until you've got a handle on the basic organization. You've got most of your photos in one place, you kind of have a sense of where they are and what you need to do next. And my photo crush process is what can help for that. So in next week's video, I'm going to walk you through how I recommend getting started with organizing your pictures before you ever turn to software like Lightroom. All right, I hope that answered your questions about Lightroom. If you have something that I haven't answered, make sure to leave a comment below and I'll get right to it. Now, if you haven't yet subscribed to my channel, make sure you hit that button so that you can be the first to know when I upload a brand new video. Next week, I'll be back with the reintroduction of my signature photo crush process. This is going to be a free class that I'm reimagining and reworking to better serve you and helping you get started with the basics of photo organization. As I mentioned in answering that last question, I recommend starting with the photo crush process so that you can get a really solid foundation before you add software into the mix. My name is Jennifer Wilson and I am your guide here at Simple Scrapper. I will see you again soon.